Hey everybody, welcome to another time in our repair corner. And one of the things that I was noticing in my talks with different customers recently is, we've done this for 34 years. And so many things that we say and do are just common knowledge, common language. But yet some of you getting started or getting around the industry may not know what some of these words or terms are. If you go through our channel, you'll see a lot of videos of our own content on clippers. And then there's also content on sharpening clipper blades, which is a big part of what we teach right now. And so I thought we might just go back to some basics and look at what is a clipper blade. When we take a tool like this and we look at it, this is a clipper that's pretty commonly used today. In this case, it's a Andis and battery driven instead of a cord. But then on top of it, this is our blade that's going to cut the hair or the fur. So in this case, one of the terms we use a lot is detachable blade. So what does that mean? Because all blades at some form or another are going to come off of the clipper. In this case, we have a little button that we're going to push in, and when we push that forward, that releases a little hook. And this little hook is way down inside here. And let me see if I can push it without the blade in place. And so as that goes back and forth, it releases the blade from the mechanism. Now I'm just going to slide this back onto the tongue and hinge it down. So when we talk about detachable blades specifically, it's something where we can push a button or at least just hinge the blade up off of the tool, and the whole unit comes off as an assembly. Now, many times we get these in from customers to have them sharpened where they didn't remove this as a unit, but what they did is they just took the screws out and sent us the two components that came off. We really need the whole thing. And so if you go through some of our videos on sharpening, you'll see that we reassemble these and get them set to some very specific tolerances. And that's what helps the blade work for the customer. So again, a detachable blade has this whole set of components. Now, if I were to take that and break it down a little bit, we would have some different terms that we would call within the blade itself. So this is our first one, is our detachable blade. We have our bigger piece that have the teeth cut in to comb through the hair. And with that, we call that the comb. Factories a lot of times call it the lower because when you're using the clipper, that's what's down on the bottom toward the skin, and so they call it the lower, but we're going to call it the comb. The teeth are going to come in, they're going to file through the hair or the fur and get it prepared for the cut. Based on the thickness of the comb, we'll give you your length of cut. And then a secondary piece that's on top of that, upper by the factories, and we're going to call it the cutter, mainly because it's the part that moves back and forth and performs the cut. Now this is pretty uniform as far as thickness typically, but again has some features such as teeth and then a little track that's built in the middle of it that then is going to work with our next component, which is our spring and guide assembly. So comb and cutter come together, and that's our cutting mechanism. Then we have our spring, which is this bigger piece up on top. And I will grab one that's already taken off. So here's our spring, and you can see it's got some different folds and bends, along with the guide that's on the front. And this guide is a little nylon piece that is what's going to run in the track of the cutter. So that right there. So as we come back and forth. So if this is damaged or cracked or anything like that, obviously it's going to affect the performance of how the blade works. Our tension is built with the spring. Tension meaning that we're going to pinch the comb and cutter together. If you ever have used a pair of paper scissors or fabric scissors and they're a little bit loose and you go up to your material and a lot of times it folds through there. You tighten the screw or you tighten your grip and it cuts. Same idea here. We just can't pinch this while we're trying to use it. So we're going to use the spring as that ability to keep the two in contact tightly together. So that's our spring. Now in between where the spring and that guide is at is what we call the socket. Andis calls it a blade bracket, others call it socket. There may be some other terms that the factories call those. In our industry, typically we call that the socket again, and so it has a flat profile to the center and two wings that sit up on the top, along with two extensions that have the threaded holes that then lock everything together for the whole blade. So it's a very important part of this clipper blade. Again, I'm going to try to find one. There we go. That's already off the tool or off of a detachable blade. So again, here's your wings with the threaded holes in it. Here's the wings that hold us stable on the clipper. And what that means is when the blade comes in here all assembled, this saddles over the top of the hinge of the clipper, and that's probably another term we should talk about, right? This is the hinge that our detachable blade mounts with. There's a tongue that it slides onto. We'll get that up there a little bit. It slides in there. And then what's happening underneath it is that this socket saddles over the top of the base of that hinge. And eventually, if we get it straight, the little latch hooks it, snap it down, and it all locks in place. Now, one of the things that happens very commonly is that blades get dropped or they get bumped, and the two little wings that are out here will get folded outward. When that happens, the whole blade can move with the action of the drive. Instead of moving the cutter, the whole blade moves. And a lot of times, one term that people commonly call that is a rattle, because it does make a bad rattling sound. And what that's doing is, and I'll get a pointer here, is that right in here, where these two wings fold over the base of the hinge, if they spread outward and there's a gap, that allows the entire, through that socket to rattle back and forth. And that's going to cause a lot of extra noise and loss of stroke. So we don't want that. It should take a tool to raise that tongue up, because this is very strong. If we snap it down without a blade, and sometimes people will have this happen, and they don't know what happened, they don't know why their blade won't go back on. And again, the tongue of the hinge, we lift it back up physically, and you can see that again. And so that's necessary to be upward, okay? But that's kind of the picture of what a detachable blade is. Look at my list here. Within the blade itself, there's a few things that we mention. One is called backset. Backset is from the end of our machining on the comb, which is right here, to the tip of the cutter, that little shelf or that little exposed part of the comb, that is called the backset. And we're going to do that for multiple purposes. One is so that when we are introducing the hair into the cut, we have room for the hair to actually prepare, that it's still not tangled and laying over, but it's ready for the cut. It's a safety feature also. If these cutting teeth were out in front of the end of our machining, they could catch skin. Not as often when it's a thick blade, but when we have a blade where the teeth are much shorter, then that could cause a lot of damage. So if we had this up here and our tooth was sitting out in front, that could cause a lot of skin damage. So again, that's called the backset. And so we're going to watch that, make sure that we have that safe. Another term that we use a lot of times is it needs to be straight. And so across the blade, all the way through the width, we want the same amount of comb tooth exposed in that backset. So very important to the setup of the blade. Then we go to tension. We mentioned that before, and that the spring creates the tension, but we actually have a range at which we will use our tool to check it. When I hold this, I try not to pinch the spring. And when I move, we need to be in that green zone. So what we're doing is we're going to push this to watch it trip. There, it's right in the green. So this one, the tension's right where we need it to be. In the chart itself, there's red at the bottom for low tension and red at the top for high tension. In between, of course, is yellow, and then we've got our green zone where we really want it to be. Well, yellow just means obviously we're getting outside of our parameter that we want. Red on the low side means, remember how we talked about a scissor that was a little loose and it folds? When we're down in the red below, we can grab the fur twist it, pull it, do different things. So we don't want things to be too loose. At the same time, if we get the blade together and we get way too high, in this case, over 3.5 pounds, so 4+ pounds, right? When we get into that zone, now what's happening is we're putting a lot of stress against the blade and the clipper. This has a little plastic drive mechanism inside it, and we're putting all that force against this plastic drive, wearing it out and damaging it more quickly than it should be. So high tension might make things cut a little better at first, but when those parts start to wear, it can't move it anymore and we've lost stroke. So stroke is another one of those terms that we would use in that idea. Now, so tension, very important. Another thing that we talk about, and you'll hear us talk about in the videos, is demagnetizing the blades. And so what we're talking about is that when we have blades that come in, they're magnetized. And then when we introduce ourselves onto a steel blade on an aluminum plate with aluminum oxide and magnets, we increase that magnetism. And what does this matter? Well, one, if you have magnetism, you've already increased the friction. Two, when we get in here and we start cleaning these off, and we created metal fleck when we were sharpening, that metal is now stuck in the blade. And we want to get that out of there so we're not damaging our new cutting edges. The other is, if somebody says, well, I really do a good job cleaning and washing my blades, I don't use a demagnetizer. That also means that where they're reassembling down on their counter has to be spick and span. If they're doing scissor sharpening and other things like that, there's all kinds of metal debris. And so when we set it down to reassemble it, we just picked up all the metal back in the teeth that's still magnetized. We use a very simple mechanism. We've got the demag back here, and so it's just a transformer, and when we come through, we run it across, and our magnetism's gone. Now when we do that, we evened out the electrons. It allows us to clean better and have a more stable, more accurate setting for everything that we do. So we recommend demagnetizing. We've talked about the rattle, the demagnetizing, tension, being straight and why that's important for safety and just for an even cut. We talked about the back set that also goes into that same picture. On the blade itself, we talked, again, I'll walk through them. We have our comb, cutter, spring, guide, and socket. Obviously, there would also be 2 screws that holds everything together. So that would be our entire detachable blade assembly. Very important part of what are used in multiple areas of several different industries that use clippers. And then to just jump forward real quick, the next area would be a screw-on blade. Now this, instead of being able to push a mechanism and remove the whole assembly, we actually have to physically take the screws out to remove this from the clipper itself. So we call those a screw-on blade. The other feature that most screw-on blades have is this arm where now we can move the comb and cutter to each other and slide them forward and back. Now with that, we get different lengths of cut, and so we call it an adjustable blade. So not only a screw-on, but also adjustable. Now we could have screw-on blades that are fixed and there's no arm. So we want to be aware of that does exist. But ultimately, we take the comb, again, we still are going to call that the comb, and our moving component of the blade back and forth is the cutter. With these, they're going to have some way to make that cutter go back and forth. In this case, we have a cam follower that is built into the blade, and then a bearing that comes in here on an eccentric to get it to move back and forth. Now this one's a little magnetized, so we'd want to demag that before putting it back on the clipper. There's lots and lots of different configurations to these, whether it's a rotary drive type clipper or electromagnetic. These drive mechanisms, even by brand, like here is the wall, that cam following piece is actually built in to the clipper itself underneath the comb and cutter inside the tool. And so we still have a cam follower or driver, but it's part of the clipper in this case compared to being part of the blade. So again, we don't get hung up on those details. The key to us when we're going to sharpen is that we need the comb and cutter exposed. In some cases with different types, now this is a wall assembly that's kind of detachable, right? But it's also an adjustable blade where, well, in this case it's an Andis brand. We can move the arm back and forth, get our adjustments. Wall is probably the longest term having this type of an assembly blade, looks very similar. But again, when we move our arm, you can see the internal parts sliding back and forth, giving us that adjustment of cut. Now, in some cases, when we go to take these apart, we'll find that this cam follower or other components are heat welded together. In that case, we really can't disassemble the clipper blade without breaking it. And those would be truly disposable type blades. The other would be as if we just cannot get the components, if something went wrong, to replace them in taking it apart. As a sharpener, we might want to avoid that. Because again, if we take it apart, we've already jumped into the process, and we, a lot of times for our company anyway, we take on the liability of that blade. So we would replace it for the customer. The other thing that you can see laid out here is I've got some different configurations of blades beyond just what was our detachable blade and our adjustable screw-on blades. These are bigger, larger blades. There's 3 different styles. Again, comb and cutter. In this case, it has a driver that's built in with a guide system. There's a couple different brands that use this type of blade. Most common here in the United States would be Lister from England and Premier out of Washington, Iowa. They use a single bolt for their tensioner, and they have a track system on the clipper that uses this guide to keep it in place, along with a couple pins to hold the comb in place. So again, that's a type of livestock blade most commonly used there. And then this is a more of a fiber or wool type blade going on a shearing machine. And again, big open teeth. They can have up to 20 teeth, which would reduce the risk of catching skin. But when we're taking wool off, a lot of times they want to take it off real fast in bulk. And then notice there's just 4 teeth on the cutter. So a very, very aggressive type blade. This is more your horse and cattle style, where we have more teeth, similar to our detachable style blades, just a lot bigger. So again, livestock application. We go to the whole other end of the spectrum. We don't want to forget trimmer blades. And so we have little tiny blades, little tiny teeth, and typically that's what your barber or beautician is going to use to do lineups on your hair, go around the ear, the back of the neck, that kind of good stuff. Clean up the edges, that kind of concept. Also, in the barbering world anymore, a lot of design work is done using the trimmer type blades. So again, hopefully this gives you a little bit of insight into the tools that we talk about in a lot of our content, and maybe this will help you not guess as much when we see these and you get started, whether you're becoming a barber, beautician, something in agriculture, pet grooming, veterinary work, or if you're going to become a sharpener and you're going to start touching these tools. Hopefully you found this content helpful. Again, we have lots of other videos, lots of content. Would love for you to subscribe to our channel. If you have anything about this, you've got questions, be sure and put those on the comments, and like the video and like other videos that we have in content. So again, thank you for your attention, and we'll look forward to the next video.